Dear friends, you are most welcome and you are watching WStv. US administration under President Joe Biden has recently granted complete immunity from prosecution in case of killing of US American journalist Jamal Khashoggi to Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This grant of immunity to Saudi Prince has exposed to the hilt all lies and claims of US rulers as to democracy and human rights. Biden administration is in effect at a time when Ukraine war is going on, and in Ukraine war specifically, US rulers are making tall claims that they have gone to Ukraine and they are defending Ukraine, they are protecting Ukraine, they are protecting its democracy, they are protecting human rights. At this time, this grant of immunity to Saudi Prince from murder of US journalist himself, that has exposed all lies and that has laid bare the character of US administration and the US regime as a whole. The pretension of these American rulers, especially in Ukraine war, now is barely exposed, and everybody can see from open eyes that these US rulers who can grant immunity to such a criminal who has murdered a journalist merely for his opposition to Saudi regime, to the regime that had been functioning under his father at the time in 2018. The grant of immunity from prosecution to such a criminal, that exposes the real character of Joe Biden administration and the US regime, US rulers as a whole. Last May, during his visit to Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia, Biden was already in effect when Saudi journalists, they had confronted Joe Biden with a question, with a troubling question. They asked him, what do you plan to do about Khashoggi's murder, journalist Khashoggi's murder, as you have promised in your election campaign? Biden, in turn, had rebuked the journalists and he remarked, why don't you guys ask something that matters, substantial? So for Joe Biden, it was very clear last year itself, in May, the last year, that Joe Biden considered the killing of a US journalist, a US citizen, not a matter, not of any substance. So he told the journalist that I'm ready to answer your questions, but you ask me something that matters. So for Joe Biden, for the top functionary of US, the killing of a journalist at the hands of a head of the state, a Saudi state, that doesn't matter at all. US journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered on 2nd of October 2018, incidentally on the day on which Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was murdered by Nathuram Godse. On 2nd October 2018, Jamal Khashoggi who was a US journalist, a US citizen, he was murdered in Saudi consulate in capital city of Turkey, Istanbul, and later investigations had pointed out that it was none else but Saudi Prince Salman, Mohammed bin Salman, who had ordered his assassination, and the security chief of Mohammed bin Salman himself has carried out and executed these orders. So far as immunity. The question of immunity is concerned, that immunity is granted to the Saudi prince who was facing a lawsuit before US courts. In fact, Khashoggi's fiancée and a human rights group that Khashoggi himself had founded before his murder, before his killing, that had filed a lawsuit, a civil suit, before a US judge, praying that Prince Salman, against whom all evidence is there, he must be held liable as the prime accused and the main perpetrator of the crime, and compensation be awarded against him. So it's a suit for declaring Mohammed bin Salman as the chief perpetrator of the crime, the mastermind behind the crime. The Biden administration has recently directed its Justice Department to move an application before the judge, informing the court that the accused in the case, the prime accused in the case, Mohammed bin Salman, has been granted complete diplomatic immunity by US administration. This was a stealth move on the back of the American public, but it was exposed as application was moved before the judge, before the federal judge. The move was exposed, and media has published it at length. This immunity, it must be mentioned, so Biden's administration is claiming that we are granting immunity to head of the states, and there is a law which grants immunity to head of the states. This is Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act of 1976, FSIA. But even this law, this only makes head of the states eligible for this immunity. They qualify for immunity as they become head of the state, but it is not incumbent upon US administration to grant such immunity, and this immunity is not granted to everyone. This is being granted selectively. Finally, it is the courts that have to decide, the judge has to decide whether this immunity should be given or not. The immunity granted by the court has to be scrutinized by the immunity granted by by the government is to be finally scrutinized by the court, by the judge, and the judge has to decide whether this immunity should remain available to Mohammed bin Salman or not. The nature of the crime is such that it doesn't warrant any immunity. Court can refuse it, but there are very bleak chances that US court is going to refuse it, because the federal judge would be under immense pressure of Biden administration, which has granted immunity to Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi prince, in a secret deal. There has been a secret deal between Saudi prince and Joe Biden. This deal encompasses many points, which include the slashing of oil prices, and it starts from there and ends up a grant of immunity to Saudi prince. The lawsuit filed by Khashoggi's fiancée and a human rights organization founded by Khashoggi, that killing, that is subject to now decision of the court. The court is going to accept this immunity or not. The Biden administration for itself has directed the Justice Department. Justice Department has already moved the federal judge with an application informing that this immunity has been granted. Prince Salman is he was declared Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia in September this year, and this declaration of his acquiring prime ministership was specifically aimed at acquiring of this immunity. The motive behind this declaration of his PMship was making him eligible for grant of this immunity under the US law. This was a conspiracy. This was a stealth settlement between Biden and the Saudi prince to make him immune from the lawsuit that is pending in US court before the federal judge. So in September, after becoming Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, at least a nominal Prime Minister, because earlier also it was not the king, Saudi king, father of Mohammed bin Salman, who was in fact ruling, the de facto ruler was Mohammed bin Salman even earlier. But because of this lawsuit, and because of the fear of prosecution and arrest on US or European land, territory, Saudi prince has not traveled to either to Europe or to US after this 2018 murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi's murder in 2018 has created an uproar, and immediately all fingers were pointing towards Saudi prince. Ultimately, he was established as a murderer, as the chief perpetrator of the crime. During his whole campaign in 2020, Joe Biden has repeatedly, again and again, he has promised that perpetrators of the crime, the murderers of Jamal Khashoggi, journalist, by which Biden clearly meant the Saudi prince, they will be brought to the book and they will be put under the axe of law. Even after Joe Biden was in office, he had assumed the office, he pledged that he would make the Saudi state a pariah state, untouchable state, and he will review the relationship between US and Saudi Arabia. Once in office, 1 year later, even 1 year later, he had released a CIA assessment report which in clear terms had accused Saudi prince of perpetrating this crime, of conspiring, of hatching a conspiracy to murder Jamal Khashoggi. Joe Biden himself had released and had read out the relevant portions of this report, which clearly pointed towards Saudi prince. And Biden had pledged that he would bring them to the book. He had severely criticized earlier President Donald Trump for not doing anything in Jamal Khashoggi's case. Not only after coming to power, but even before that, Joe Biden had made this issue a prime point in his election campaign, in his poll campaign, where he said that Donald Trump has given lots of concessions, and once he is in power, that means Biden is in power, he would see that the accused are not only tried but prosecuted. The report clearly pointed out that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi was ordered by Prince Salman and was carried out by his right-hand man, his security chief. But then Joe Biden has taken a U-turn and has granted immunity. A U-turn means where Joe Biden was saying that he would prosecute Prince Salman, and then he granted him immunity from prosecution, and then he justified it. While justifying it, he has cited example of Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi was granted immunity in 2014 by Donald Trump. So to impress upon Republicans, to rope in the Republicans in his decision to prosecute, to not to prosecute Salman and grant him immunity, Joe Biden cites the precedent, the example of Narendra Modi, who was granted immunity by Donald Trump, by the Republicans. Narendra Modi was prosecuted in US through a lawsuit that was filed in 2002. In 2005, when Narendra Modi proposed to go to US and applied for a visa, that visa was refused to him, and he couldn't go to US. Had he gone to US, he could have been arrested and put under the axe of law. But thereafter, when he won the election in 2014 and became Prime Minister of India, he was granted immunity by the then US President Donald Trump. This grant of immunity, this bestowing of the benefit upon a criminal like Narendra Modi, who had perpetrated the riots of Gujarat, communal riots in Gujarat, who had overseen them, where more than 2,000 had fallen victim. They have succumbed to the violence in Gujarat riots. So he was refused visa in 2005. But then 2014, he was granted immunity by Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, who himself had led a semi-fascist movement in US, who in 2020, February 2020, had attempted a coup in US. So his fascist cousin was sitting as president in US, who had granted immunity to Narendra Modi. And now citing that immunity granted to Narendra Modi, now Joe Biden, who was opposing at that time this immunity, now he is justifying the immunity granted to Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman and citing Narendra Modi's case as a precedent. What a mockery of law and history. Washington Post, where Khashoggi used to write a regular column, has condemned this grant of immunity to Saudi Prince and has written an editorial where Washington Post says that Biden has failed to uphold democratic values so cherished by the US citizens. It has termed this grant of immunity as a license to kill granted by Joe Biden administration. But Biden, in turn, has cited Narendra Modi's case to impress upon the Republicans, and he has succeeded. Both the Democrats and Republicans are now supporting Biden's decision. Republicans, who should have opposed it, being in opposition, they are also supporting decision of Joe Biden. Democrats are supporting. Democrats, because Biden belongs to the Democratic Party, so obviously they would support his decision. But Republicans are also supporting. Both the major parties of US, Democrats and Republicans, they are in favor of granting this immunity to Saudi monarch. Saudi monarchy is one of the cruelest barbaric monarchies, barbaric regimes, I would say, of the world. It kills hundreds of its opponents through public beheading and public hanging every year. In the last 10 days, it has already directed beheading of more than 1 dozen people by sword and in full public view. Journalists, human rights activists, and opposition leaders, especially those belonging to Shia minority, they are always poor victims under the axe of the Saudi regime. They are beheaded. They are publicly hanged. They are murdered. The last March, 81 people were beheaded by sword in one go, at one stroke, on Saudi Prince orders. It was Saudi Prince who ordered the beheading of these 81 people. Saudi Arabia is major producer of oil, and alongside it is major purchaser of US arms also. Biden said he would assess the US relations with Saudis and ensure that US values are not checked out at the door to sell arms or buy oil from Saudi Arabia. But now he has forgotten everything. He has entered into a secret deal with Saudi Prince. Biden had traveled to Riyadh last May for a meeting with Prince Salman. Whatever he has said, whatever he has claimed during his polls, he was to retract that, and he was to convince the Saudi rulers that that was only a poll gimmickry. He requested the Saudi regime to lower the prices of crude oil. But the Saudi regime, instead of lowering the price, lowering the production, by apology, it had enhanced it. It had enhanced the production, and consequently, the prices of oil had fallen. Saudis had applied this maneuver of increasing the production to pressurize US administration more and more, to extract more and more concessions. And those concessions, above all, they included the immunity for Saudi Prince, and ultimately they had succeeded in this. This immunity is extracted from US rulers, and US rulers, fancifully, the US rulers who had been claiming that they stand for democracy, they stand for human rights, and they would prosecute the Saudi prince, how they themselves have granted immunity from prosecution to Saudi prince. When Saudi prince is being prosecuted by US citizens, PNC of killed journalists and the human rights organization, and they are not even keeping mum. They are not keeping even their neutrality. They have come to the aid of this killer, this murderer, Saudi prince, and they have granted immunity to him. US maintains its global domination and its global hegemony through such maneuvers by roping in these murderers and autocrats in its favor and using them against the world people. In his recent visit to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, Joe Biden has praised Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, a criminal responsible for murder of thousands of workers and youth in 2013 military coup in Egypt, and who is holding the power in Egypt by force, through violence and through suppression of all political opposition. The criminal who has crushed the revolutionary uprising in Egypt in 2013 through a military coup. Biden has praised him. Biden has praised him for many things, including his role in Gaza Strip, where Sisi lends direct support to Israeli oppressors, Israeli regime, and has blocked the exit of enclaves, Palestine enclaves, citizens. They're sneaking into Egypt by erecting a wall on the border. Kamala Harris, the vice president of an US administration, has planned to meet Philippine dictatorial president Ferdinand Marcos Jr. after attending ASEAN summit in Thailand. So she is going to meet the Philippine president. In Bangkok, she is to meet Thai military ruler Prayut Chan-o-cha, who is connected to financial oligarchy of Japan and US, and who has recently pledged to join the US campaign against China, US military campaign. Thai regime is infamous for disposing of and dispersing many parliaments, rigging general elections, and beheading opposition leaders, banning the political parties, and many actions of the such notoriety. All political opposition and protests, they are suppressed with violence in Thailand. And with all these autocrats and dictators, US rulers, they are maintaining a friendly relation, and then they tell us that they are going to Ukraine to defend the democracy and human rights, the sovereignty of Ukraine. So they are lying on that. This lie is totally exposed with this grant of immunity to Mohammed bin Salman. Not to a surprise, both Republicans and Democrats are supporting the decision of Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, granting immunity to Mohammed bin Salman. They both have welcomed and supported this immunity given by the administration under Joe Biden to the Prince, and both of them sure supporters of US capitalism. They look upon Saudi Arabia not from any humanitarian or democratic angle, but as an antidote, political antidote to Iran's influence in the Middle East. And therefore, they support Saudi regime in any case and under any circumstances whatsoever, and the US administration is immune of change of regime. Whether Democrats are in power or Republicans are in power, it doesn't matter. Saudi Arabia remains a friend to US rulers, US regime as a whole. Republicans, they are sitting in opposition, but even then they are supporting the decision of Democrat Biden to grant immunity to Saudi ruler, Saudi Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman. Republican Senator Tom Cotton is given in a recent interview to Fox News Sunday. He says, what matters most, that is very important, His words are very important. He says that what matters most about governments around the world is not that they are democratic or undemocratic. What matters is that whether they are pro or anti-US. And simple fact is that Saudi Arabia is US partner for more than 80 years. So this is the viewpoint. This is the approach, political approach of US rulers. So they pretend before US working class and the working people outside of US, they pretend that as Democrats, they stand for human rights, for democracy, for defense of sovereignty of nations. But in fact, they do not stand for anything. They stand for crude interests of US capitalists. As the Senator Tom Cotton, Republican Senator Tom Cotton, has put it very bluntly and truthfully, that US stands for its friendships. It stands for strengthening and reinforcing its military bloc, its diplomatic bloc in the world. Irrespective of a country is democratic or not, whether its regime is a monarchy or a democracy, it doesn't matter. Whether they are beheading their people, whether they are publicly hanging their opponents, their political opponents, whether they are killing journalists for speaking against the regime, it doesn't matter for the US. What matters is that whether that regime supports US or not. In granting immunity to foreign rulers, US rulers want reciprocity for themselves. In fact, US rulers themselves, they are the biggest murderers. They are the biggest killers in the world. They have killed more people than Hitler or Mussolini. In the last few decades, US administration is responsible for millions of killings around the world. Killings in war, killings through blockades, killings through hunger. So these actions of US administrators, US leaders, they make them liable for prosecution on foreign lands, and they are fearful of it, that they may be arrested and they may be prosecuted on foreign lands. So they want reciprocity in turn. They are bestowing immunity on foreign heads of the state, and they want that their functionaries be also granted the similar immunity from the prosecutions that may be lodged against them sooner or later. Victims of US aggression over the world, they are in millions. And US rulers, they are fearful of their own prosecution. The act they have brought, Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act in 1976, that is a cover-up for their crimes, for the crimes committed by their friends all over the world. And through such immunity, they are in fact granting insulation, legal insulation from prosecutions to their friends, and they want that their friends also return the favor and grant immunity to them. Even this act of 1976, it creates 9 exceptions, and all these 9 exceptions, they are related to commercial activities. That means that if you do any dishonesty in commercial activity, in taking loans, granting loans, in doing the business, then this immunity would not be available for you. But if you murder a journalist, then you can claim the immunity, and then this immunity would be bestowed upon you. For this reason, for the reason of its unspeakable crimes, the US has specifically refused to join, to become member of the treaty through which International Criminal Court was established in Hague. they are still refusing to do it. Rather, on the contrary, instead of joining this International Criminal Court Treaty, they have enacted, US rulers have enacted a law against it, and they authorized their military to take action if a US citizen is put under arrest on the orders of ICC, International Criminal Court. Whether it is UN or International Criminal Court, no bourgeois institution, national or international, can do any harm or prosecute these international criminals, these capitalist imperialist wolves. It is only the revolutionary action of the working class, international working class, the united action of the international working class, that can prosecute and punish these international criminals on whose hands is lying the blood of millions of workers and toilers all around the world. So with this appeal, dear friends, to unite against these imperialist wolves in the common fight, join the common fight against these capitalist criminals. We appeal to you that you join the struggle, join the common struggle, and fight for the revolution that would do away not only with these criminals, but with these fake institutions like UN and the International Criminal Court, which have never taken any step against these criminals who are guilty of murdering millions and millions of workers, peasants, and toilers all around the world. So, with these words, dear friends, I seek your kind permission to end up with this show today. We will continue the sort of expository shows, and joining hands with each other, will continue to fight for socialist rule around the world. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see you.